Will we spend money like how the executive is spending money?
What Bank Negara is doing is setting a very stable monetary policy environment.
Hello everybody and welcome to Beyond the Headlines, where we break down the biggest stories shaping our country. I'm Amalina Kamal and today we bring you the latest updates from Parliament. To kickstart the show, we're looking at a major shift in how our democracy operates. After 33 years, Parliament is finally reclaiming control over its own administration with the passing of the Parliamentary Services Bill 2025. Now, this bill promises greater independence, freeing Parliament from government's influence over staffing, funding and daily operations. But in politics, nothing is ever that simple. The bill passed with a 2/3 majority. 148 MPs voted in favour, while 57 others abstained. Why does this matter to you? To break it all down, we caught up with one of the key individuals supporting the bill, Subang MP Wong Chen, to bring you better insights. In what capacity do you think this particular bill can contribute to strengthening parliamentary independence?
Will it bring back, independence of Parliament? I would say that it's the first step. So it's maybe some people will say baby step. I think it's a step. It's a step, and its implementation will be the core issue because the law is a bit brief in its format. There are a lot of questions about the interpretation of things. Now, I always take the view that we have to take the first step first. Then we need to see its implementation. And from implementation, the most important thing is the government need to make a commitment to make amendments in the future after seeing the implementation works or not.
So in that context, right, what's the stopgap measure in terms of, ensuring that this PSA, once it's executed, is able to sustain?
Well, the most important thing is the PSA commission or council needs to be composed properly. The Prime Minister made a good speech. He said there are 4 members from the Members of Parliament who are in the lower house and 2 senators. So that's good. And there are opposition in there. So that's a start. It's not a majority position, but at least we can get input directly from the MPs. How we choose the MPs to become members of that's also a contentious issue, but at least on paper, they are committed to have representation of MPs at the parliamentary service level.
And how often should this be rotated or reviewed?
No, I think that's the thing. There is a selection committee which is headed by the senior leaders of the political parties, and they tend to be ministers. So we need a clear indication that those people who are appointed into this PSA will definitely be members of parliament who are non-executive. We need that at least. But, I want to jump the gun on this matter. We see the appointment first. In the PSA, I remember it was like 7 members. Now it's expanded to 13. So it's quite substantial. Of which 6 are 4 members of parliament, 2 senators. So the government still has, or at least the speaker, every speaker, which are appointed by the government, supported by MPs, right? They still have a strong composition in there. So the first hurdle is to see the composition of that. If it's balanced, if they're listening, then I think that's a big step. Because many of these core issues about funding, which members of the civil service is going to be moved into the parliamentary service sector, which are going to remain civil servants, the clerk of the house, is he a civil servant or not? All this will be tested through implementation.
What measures do you think have been proposed to ensure Parliament's financial independence is upheld?
That's the thing. Eventually, we would like to have control of the PSA, or at least the council, involved, so that, when we need something, like the rest of parliaments in the world, when they need something, they request, the government has to give it to them, right? You could say they could request a Rolls-Royce age, okay? But then the public will never accept it. So the public needs to understand that the requirements for us to run a proper committee system, it needs funding, it needs to enlarge the powers of parliament so that we can become checks and balance to the government. All these details means that we need to empower parliamentarians to take control of parliament. Will we go overboard and ask for the sky? Will we spend money like how the executive is spending money? No, of course not, because the people will not accept this.
Well,
Right.
but in retrospect, is that not the case now? Maybe for our audience who are not necessarily in the know, could you highlight?
No, absolutely. I mean, the budget in Parliament is really, really small, right? Because the fundamental issue in Parliament is members of Parliament pass laws. The lawmaking process in Malaysia is flawed because we don't have committees with ability to judge these laws or even write laws of our own. We have no ability to put private members' bill, right? So these things makes the lawmaking process in Malaysia uniquely wrong. Yeah? This is decades in the making. So the Madani government is committed to reforms of Parliament. One of the fundamental reform is to separate the powers of executive from the legislators, basically the PSA. But at the heart of the PSA is the issue of funding members of Parliament to do their job. For instance, I'm chairman of the Parliamentary Select Committee on International Relations and International Trade. It's international. We're supposed to travel. We're supposed to pursue diplomacy. We're supposed to engage, foreign investors in Malaysia and go out there and meet them. Well, the budget is extremely small.
And how small?
Okay, on paper we were given 200,000 for the year, right? And then they give us 2 officers, right? I'm assuming officers are being paid like 5,000 a month, so that's 120,000. So you've got 120,000 for operations of 2 officers and 200,000 travel budget on paper. But for the last 2 years, we've managed to not get any funding for travel, other than domestic travel where we use the Parliament bus to go to PJ, go to Malacca. The furthest we went was like Penang, right?
Yeah, but
That's an international committee.
understand.
You understand?
Right.
So the funding is absolutely inadequate. When we look at Indonesia, their committees, they're called komisi there, they're funded like 10 million ringgit, right? They can do a lot of things. What I need is not 2 officers. What I need for a committee to be fully operational, to be involved in the lawmaking process, is a budget of minimum 2 million a year, so I can hire 10 researchers. I have a budget to do travel, right? International committee need to travel, right? To attend UN things, to attend, to go to ILO, to go to Geneva.
Right. But how does this address the Madani government's push for, having to streamline costs as well?
But you don't streamline costs of the Parliament. The Parliament is an extremely important organ to make sure that we provide check and balance and democracy, defend the Constitution. We make the laws. The government's job, the executive, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, their job is to implement. They have, 1.2 million, 1.3 million civil servants. That's the budget. They work on a 400 billion budget. Parliament doesn't even have those kind of numbers anywhere near. I think our budget is 130 million or 120 million. It is not operational.
What are your thoughts on, the recent amendment bill after being passed, that the vote actually saw 57 MPs abstaining from it?
Well, it's their choice, right? I mean, if they don't want to support it and they don't want to go against it, that means they're taking a neutral stand of abstaining. So, that's their view. You have to ask them why they chose that path.
But in the neutrality of it all, what are some of the considerations that maybe you can highlight on?
I haven't spoken to them, so it's not fair to put words in their mouth because I have no idea what goes through their mind. But they have managed to meet some NGOs. The NGOs also met me. They've raised the same concerns, I think. So I don't know what their position is, but from the NGO's perspective, they agree with our view, which is we need to support this because it's a big step, right? Some people call it baby step, but I think it's a big step. But it's the draft itself has a lot of holes in there. And maybe it's designed like that so that we can implement and make up how to do this as we go along. But the most important thing is, and the Prime Minister made a commitment to that, is that he agrees in separation of power. He agrees that the Parliament must be funded to do our fundamental job. So as long as he agrees on those on paper, or at least in the speech, then we know that's the path we're going. What we do with this very loose law, with holes everywhere, is that we see its implementation and a commitment by the government, say a year or 2 years from now, after implementation, because once you implement, you're going to tunggu feedback. You have to wait for the feedback to come back, then you've got to revise, and then when we see, okay, these are the gaps we need to fill up, come back to Parliament, amend the law. But let's get this running now, imperfect as it is, or in some people even argue it's like 30% of what we need to do, right? Is that low?
Right. Maybe can we go back to, because you mentioned that you, instead of having a handful of people, you actually need a team to ensure that certain initiatives take place or research take place. Can you explain a little bit?
What we do is we have hearings, right? So for my committee in particular, I can't speak for other committees. For my committee, we look at MOFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we look at MITI, International Trade, and also we have a division, half or at least a quarter of what Economic Ministry does in terms of FDI, we are responsible for. Right? So what we do is we have hearings. We meet diplomats, we ask them to come to Parliament, they give their point of view. So typically most foreign diplomats will complain about, get feedback from their companies operating in Malaysia, and they say, oh yeah, we have labor issues, or we have difficulty getting work permits, right? We listen to this. We need to write a report for this, but I have 2 officers. How can the report be written? Seriously, how do we follow up?
Baby steps.
The baby steps or big step, however you call it. The implementation will really decide where we are going on parliamentary democracy. I've been a member of parliament for 12, 13 years now. So I think there was a push, started about 7, 8 years ago. We started pushing for this PSA earnestly. And the good news is, of course, people say instability, government comes and go, 4 or 5 prime ministers, right? But I think everybody had a taste of being in the opposition. So members of parliament are starting to realize that, we have to be separate from the executive. We need to be more responsible. We need to attend parliament. We need to debate properly. We need to run committees. All these budgetary issues are so constraining at the moment because of lack of budget, is against that belief that MPs can do better, right? So to me, again, I repeat this, we ask for bigger budget, reasonable, not unreasonable at all. Government said, wait for the PSA. We got the PSA now we're waiting.
I mean, I know maybe it's a bit too early to determine, but
sure.
How do you think we can ensure future governments uphold or attempt to not reverse the PSA's provisions?
Well, the PSA needed the constitutional amendment, right? That requires 2/3 to give us the ground to pass the PSA, because it talks about the separation of civil service. Now, can they reverse it? They can repeal the PSA. Do they need to repeal the constitutional model? Probably also. That repealing of the constitutional bit is more challenging. So I think to reverse it is quite difficult. You can pass a 51% to repeal it, but that will leave the constitutional part hanging. Yeah, I'm not an expert in this matter, but I think it's not so easy to reverse. And especially, more importantly, there's a new culture in parliament, right? Parliamentarians, most of them in the hall, have experience being in government and opposition. So I think there is a movement, a deep down belief that the parliamentarians need to unite. Yeah, because you're not sure how long your government will last, correct? Especially 4 or 5 prime ministers in the last 5, 10 years, right? So right. It's not like ruling. I'm not ruling for 60 years. That kind of thing is too fluid. Coalitions are going to come and go, form, reform. So members of parliament need to understand they need to do their job. No, please, don't get us wrong. We are not asking for pay rise. And the members of parliament are not asking for pay rise. But
or at least monetary sort of like...
not like yourself. You're a reporter, right? Yeah. I'm sure you have a backup team, right? You have, videographer, editors, all sort of things. Everybody doing their job. How can a 9-member team of a committee do its job with 2 support staff? I mean, please, right? We are not asking for anything unusual, especially when you compare, poorer countries than us who spend a lot more than what we are demanding, right? So don't send the message out there that we are just asking for more stuff to, more. We're just asking for adequate, reasonable budget to do our job. And the job, people make fun of MPs. They think, all we do is shout every day at each other. There's a lot of things that's not covered by the media or the people. People have no knowledge of. It's all the policy work of the committees. It's real. But how can we do the job if you give me 2 officers? How? My personal office, parliamentary office, where 1 MP, I got 6 officers. And we are like struggling every day. Iskandar cannot sleep. Ivan is working non-stop. Right? What more? A PSC of 9 members. Parliament body. A body of Malaysian parliament. Parliament is supposed to be an apex body in Malaysia. Right? 2 officers? Please lah. I hope you all don't get it wrong. We're not saying we're asking for new things. We're just asking a crew to help us do our job. Give me 10 workers to support 9 MPs. I'll be very happy.
You did highlight in terms of attracting more FDIs within Malaysia, right?
Yeah.
So what's the aim goal?
No, we had a very good FDI. Okay, let's be fair. Okay, number one, 2024 saw immense amount of FDI flowing into the country. A lot. I mean, from Nvidia, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, all the biggest companies in the world, right, came here to pursue data centers, yeah, but also to help us get into the ecosystem for AI, yeah, in the longer term. So we've been responding by trying to supply them renewable energy, trying to get STEM up workers, trying to get water supply better. So this is a process. So they've come in. We are now meeting those challenges with some hiccups. Of course, members of parliament are pushing for better access to renewable, for instance, right? Some of us are asking, can we spend more money on water resource? Can we ask the ministry to improve STEM, right? Those things are a work in process. So FDIs are coming. Now with Trump in power, FDIs may slow down because all these are tied up to the issue of tariff and global trade. What we're seeing in the first 2 months of the Trump administration is that there is a broad idea tariff has to be implemented, but we don't know how the inner workings of the tariff. Like this morning with Mexico and Canada, they announced that automotive parts are not part of the tariff. So this refining process, say Mexico supplies 100 things to America, how many of these things will actually be hit by tariff? It could be 60, it could be 70, it could be 10, we don't know. So all that will develop in the next 3 months or so as they negotiate further.
Now on to a key economic update, Bank Negara Malaysia's latest decision on the overnight policy rate, OPR. Bank Negara has announced its latest OPR adjustment, reflecting shifts in economic conditions and monetary policy priorities. Previously, analysts predicted the OPR would remain at 3% throughout 2025, with inflation holding steady at 1.7% in January. But what does this mean for you? If you have a loan, whether for housing, a car, or personal financing, your repayments will be affected as banks adjust their lending rates. A higher OPR means borrowing costs increase, while a lower OPR could ease financial burdens. To break down the impact of this decision and what it signals for Malaysia's economic outlook, we turn to economist Dr. Jeffrey Williams.
I think that we are fully expecting the interest rate to remain stable for the rest of the year, unless there are some major changes in the international economy. Bank Negara has a mandate, and the mandate is to help to maintain price stability. That's basically inflation. And inflation is at historically normal levels at the moment. The next is to help to support economic growth. And as we saw for last year, economic growth is really very strong. It's above 5%. And the third thing that Bank Negara has to do is to maintain financial sector stability. And we can see that the Malaysian financial sector is in a very good place. So that mandate is what really guides the decision on interest rates. And that because that mandate is in a good position and it's strong, there should be no change in interest rates, and that's what we're seeing. In terms of benefit for the rakyat or the economy more widely, what Bank Negara is doing is setting a very stable monetary policy environment that will allow economic growth to continue into this year, so long as we don't have external shocks. And it's that stability that will help people to be able to expect higher economic growth, higher wages, more employment, better economic conditions generally, and that will be how people benefit from the stable interest rate position.
Right. But borrowers still may feel the pinch. However, in terms of the stable OPR, it actually prevents excessive debt. Correct me if I'm wrong?
Well, there are two aspects to this. Actually, because interest rates are at 3% and inflation is just below 2%, actually the real interest rate, when you take into account prices, is actually very low. It's only around 1%, a little bit more than 1%. So interest rates are actually very low. And for people who are borrowing money, that means that they should be able to afford to pay the repayments on their loans. And in fact, what we can see from other Bank Negara data is that the default on loans in Malaysia is very low indeed. And that means that people are able to accommodate interest rates at 3%. If interest rates were much lower, there is a danger that there would be more debt. People would take on more loans at low interest rates. And then later on, if interest rates were to rise, that might cause them to have difficulties in repaying the loans later on. So Bank Negara has to walk that balance. And I think interest rates at 3% is about the right rate. And it's also historically about the right rate. And so if you around there, you should be able to achieve long-term economic growth.
Understood. Just wanted to understand because there are people assuming, I suppose, in terms of Bank Negara being overly cautious at the expense of consumer relief. So, I mean, despite the stable inflation, how can we highlight in terms of how we can manage Malaysia's struggle when it comes to affordability here?
I don't think Malaysia does have an inflation problem at the moment. Inflation is at historically normal levels. It's less than 2%. And that's about where it should be. There are particular issues in terms of food inflation, for example. And that, of course, these are issues that need to be taken into account. But Bank Negara can't really affect those things through interest rate decisions. The real problem in terms of affordability in Malaysia is not so much the question of inflation and price stability. The real problem is in incomes and the low level of incomes right across the board. Is structurally low incomes. And the government is addressing that through the economy ministry. And that's a wholly different policy agenda. Bank Negara can support that through setting a stable monetary policy, but Bank Negara can't necessarily affect people's income levels.
Understood. One last question. Do you think Malaysia's economic growth will be stifled if, let's say, Bank Negara does keep the OPR unchanged for too long? I mean, we know that this OPR will remain for the year, but if, let's say, this is a mainstay for the next 2-3 years, or do you think, Malaysia's economic growth will be stifled?
Well, if monetary policy is stable, that gives an opportunity for the government to focus on structural reforms. And if the government focuses on that, improves domestic investment, foreign direct investment, improves wages, improves the labor market, improves competition within the product and services markets, then that will be what will maintain long-term economic growth on the supply side of the economy. So keeping a very good macroeconomic environment with good growth, stable inflation, and stable interest rates allows the government to focus on structural reforms. And it's the structural reforms which will deliver the long-term economic benefits.
Right. Even if global central banks pivot towards rate cuts?
Well, if global interest rates start to come down, then that gives an opportunity for Bank Negara to follow suit. But ultimately, Bank Negara has to set interest rates according to its domestic mandate, which of course is affected by the international environment. But Bank Negara sets interest rates for Malaysia. It does not set interest rates for the US or Europe. And similarly, the Federal Reserve does not set interest rates in Malaysia. So Bank Negara has to look at the domestic situation and set the interest rate as is necessary for domestic economic growth and stability. But if interest rates generally are lower, that does give some opportunity for Bank Negara to ease interest rates here. But we have to wait and see whether that will happen.
Unfortunately, that's all we have for this episode here today. If you like this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to also turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. You'll not only get Beyond the Headlines update, other NST Online news reports will be delivered to you. My name is Amalina Kamal. Don't forget to also follow us on socials, and I'll see you next week.